My name is Hanna Holmqvist. I'm a researcher at IVL Swedish Environmental Research Institute. I will here give a presentation called A Life Cycle-Based Assessment Toolbox to assess and improve safety and sustainability of chemicals. This work is done within the Mistra SafeChem program. Mistra is the Swedish Foundation for Strategic Environmental Research, and SafeChem is one of the largest programs so far, and it runs from 2020 to 2024. I would like to start with a take-home message, and that is that substitution of hazardous chemicals and sustainable process design require advancements of life cycle-based models and tools for inclusion of ecotoxicity and toxicity aspects. In Mr. SafeChem, a toolbox to address this need is being developed based on a wide array of case studies. The SafeChem program covers many topics, and it has one unifying vision. That is to enable and promote the expansion of a safe, sustainable and green chemical industry in Sweden. We have a web page, and you can see the address on the slide. You're very welcome to visit the web page and learn more about the program. Within SafeChem, we have a work package called Lifecycle Assessment and Management. The toolbox presented here is developed in this work package and by the team listed on this slide. Organizations involved are IVL, Volvo Cars, DTU, RISE, AstraZeneca, Perstorp, and BASF. I am the work package leader, and you're most welcome to contact me on this email or via the conference chat function. Straight to the toolbox, a life cycle-based chemical assessment toolbox. We foresee the toolbox to look like this and to have three main entry points. The toolbox can be used to make chemical alternatives assessment, where focus is on substituting hazardous chemicals in a specific product or process application. It can be used for chemical footprint assessment, where focus is on assessing toxicity and ecotoxicity profiles of products or processes. And it can be used for life cycle assessment, where focus is on assessing all relevant environmental impacts of product or process systems, including a chemical footprint. In the toolbox, we have two key models, the use tox and the ProScale models, and I will talk more about them in a little bit. The data space includes databases, industry data, measured data, and predicted data, and we have a strong focus on the latter. More about that as well in a little bit. The toolbox will be tested in a wide area of case studies. Needs for further advancements will be identified, and the case studies will also provide an illustration of the toolbox in the guidance to its use. The use tox model is a UNEP-CETAC global scientific consensus model for human toxicity and ecotoxicity characterization. It was first published in 2008 by Rosenbaum and colleagues. This is a model for impact assessment, including fate, exposure, and effects of chemicals. Now the scope has been broadened, and in 2021, new updates were published. Those include a combination of consumer exposure and emission-based exposure in a matrix system, integrating far-field and near-field exposure, and a probabilistic dose-response approach for toxic effects, combined with a decision tree for identifying reliable points of departure for non-cancer effects. Read more about those updates in the recent paper published this year by Peter Vanke and colleagues. ProScale is a method for assessing the toxicological potentials of product systems in a life cycle perspective. It is designed to allow for the use of data generated under REACH and CLP. In ProScale, the hazard factor, that is describing substance hazard, exposure concentration factor, a person-hour factor, and a mass flow are calculated for each substance and each unit process, and then combined to establish the ProScale score. In SafeChem, updates are being made to ProScale, and we have preliminary normalization scores available. A ProScale test implementation in the product environmental footprint pilot on paint is ongoing, and we are discussing how to implement ProScale in lifecycle inventory and lifecycle assessment databases. As I mentioned previously, we have a focus on data prediction tools in the SafeChem program, and we're just about to launch a PhD project that we call Advancing Lifecycle-Based Chemical Toxicity Assessment through Digitalization. On this slide, you see a schematic view of the SafeChem program. In work packages on design and management of chemicals, materials, and processes, and industrial case studies, target chemicals are identified and screened for hazard and risk in a work package with focus on in silico and in vitro methods. Data are then fed into the life cycle assessment work package. And herein we have the digitalization research project. Here we will evaluate digitalization techniques from big data analysis, data integration, and machine learning, map digitalization techniques to gaps in life cycle toxicity characterization and chemical substitution, develop decision rules for the relevance of impact categories based on chemical function analysis, predict chemical exposure and toxicity effects using adequate machine learning methods, and finally, test the approaches in real-life industry case studies to design sustainable products and processes. I will not go into detail on all case studies that we use for Toolbox development, but I would like to give you an impression of the variety of case studies. We are looking at indoor air quality, materials inside the car that do not cause health effects, environmental effects of cyclosiloxanes and silicons, and when necessary, identification or development of suitable substitutes or alternative processes, the design of sustainable catalytic processes, tailoring of designed green chemical processes for fine particle recovery and reuse, recycling of textiles and forest residues to produce chemicals and nanocellulose, insulation materials and the influence of different materials here, and environmentally sound surfactants. As we're early on in the program, there is a possibility of adding even more case studies to this list. Just to give you an example of how a case study could look like, I here present the car case study briefly. Its purpose is to identify possible hazardous chemicals emitted from materials inside the car cabin and to evaluate suitable alternatives. The toolbox that I present here will be applied for chemical prioritization and for alternatives assessment, with emphasis on in silico predictions to generate model input data, focuses on toxicity and ecotoxicity. The results are expected to be used for possible identification of chemicals that should be added to a restricted substance list and for the identification of suitable alternatives if chemicals are prioritized. In summary, the life cycle-based chemicals assessment toolbox will be developed based on case study experiences. We have a strong focus on digitalization and high throughput modeling. A guidance and illustration of the toolbox will be made available at project finalization. An identification of needs for further model and tool advancements and end-user requirements for a toolbox interface will be brought into a potential phase 2 of the program. With that, I would like to thank CETAC for giving me the opportunity to give this presentation, Mistra for financial support, and all SafeChem colleagues. Thank you.